new is always overvalued in relation to old and good. Return to the fundamentals. Like, start your research from a place of understanding what's your pricing strategy, what features and benefits and core aspects of your product really make it interesting and make people want to consume it or purchase it. Things that we probably need to do better today than what we used to do in the past is a mediocre piece of content and letting that drive profitability within meta ad accounts are kind of over. The creative strategy is really what drives effectiveness on meta ad campaigns in 2024. There's really three core metrics that we always want to orient our clients towards. The first one is customer acquisition cost. The second is average order value. And then the third is lifetime value. So I think our generation really cares about the why behind a lot of brands. We're living in an age where it's so easy to start a brand. Instead of thinking about what's going to change, I like to think about what's going to stay the same, because the tools and the technology is always going to change in digital marketing. People always over-index on like, this is the new sexy thing that's working versus the old tried and true good thing that's kind of known to work across the board. I would encourage marketers to kind of return to some of the fundamentals, knowing that the technology and the tools are always going to change.
Jordan, how are you doing today? It's a pleasure to be chatting with you.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. Doing great.
Glad to hear it. I'd like for you just to start out telling me about Courageous, types of clients you serve, types of things you do for them, and then also kind of how the business came about, because it's relatively new, but growing quickly.
Yeah, totally. So I've been in the marketing industry for about 13 years. I co-founded 2 e-commerce businesses in my mid to late 20s. And outside of those businesses, I worked at 2 large growth agencies, most recently for a company called Graphite, which was headquartered in Silicon Valley, working with a lot of big brands like Netflix and Calm and Upwork. And I loved working with a lot of amazing brands in the tech industry. But I kind of got to a point where I was feeling like I wanted to take a lot of the skills that I had accumulated across my career and apply them to brands that were really focusing on making the world a happier and healthier place. So taking what I was great at and applying them to more mission-driven brands. So that's kind of our goal at Courageous. We focus on brands that are mostly in the health and wellness space. All of them are direct consumer brands, mostly in the CPG space, but not always. And most of them are like 0 to 50 million in revenue and under. And we focus, I would say, on 6 core strategies and competencies across the agency. So growth strategy, really helping clients understand the competitive landscape, understanding their key competitive advantages, how to define strategies that are going to help their businesses grow. Paid media, so ad creation, ad management, retention marketing, email marketing, SMS, landing page design and web development, analytics, and then SEO and pay-per-click.
Pretty comprehensive. What are some of the brands you're working with, if you want to shout any out on like the mission-driven CPG side?
Yeah, sure. I can shout a few out. So we are working with a gluten-free 2-ingredient bread brand called Pasha. They're available in Whole Foods nationwide. I've been with them for about
photos on the site. It looks good.
Cool. Yeah, they're amazing. I've been with them for about 3.5 years now. So really seeing a huge explosion in their business. I'm working with a brand called Philosopher Foods that makes the world's first fermented nut, which is also a regenerative food company. Another regenerative food company called Imlakesh Organics. A couple brands in the mental health, sort of like psychedelic space as well. One of them is called Lucid Therapeutics in Santa Barbara. So yeah, a lot of really interesting brands. Most of them, like I said, are kind of in the health and wellness space.
Yeah, I think one of the things that stuck out to me is mission-driven brands have such an opportunity to use content in a way that I think other brands don't, because they just have a compelling story by that. Like, there's just a reason for the product and there's just so much more to say about it. What role do you see these businesses using content to play for various promotional purposes?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the ways that I think about growth, especially in the e-commerce world, is that there's really 3 core metrics that we always want to orient our clients towards. The first one is customer acquisition cost. So how much money are you spending to acquire one customer? The second is average order value. So how much money do they tend to spend with your brand on one order? And then the third is lifetime value. So how long do they stick around for? If someone's buying gluten-free bread off of a website, do they buy it one time? They don't really love it. They never come back. Or are they buying that bread for the next 5-10 years? So I think when it comes to content creation, content can be leveraged at all stages there to impact every single one of those metrics. So for example, at the top of the funnel, what we see a lot of successful brands doing is we basically just put their founders on camera and we ask their founders to tell stories about the brand, what resonates with the brand. We'll scrape reviews using ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to tell us what customers really care about. Like what are some of the core features, benefits that they're loving about the brand, and then have founders speak to those benefits and features, for example. So I think, one of the things that we always encourage founders to do, if they're comfortable with it, is to get on camera and start creating content and telling their stories. And to your point, if you're craft and you're selling bread, you have a much less compelling narrative versus a brand like Pasha, who is creating this bread truly to make the world a better place. They're using regenerative agriculture. They're testing their bread and showing how it's essentially the healthiest bread that you can buy. And so to your point, being able to tell that story effectively, I think in the world of social media, in the world of content creation is really important. And so implementing some of those strategies to impact that customer acquisition cost is kind of the first thing that comes to mind. And then content can be leveraged at all stages of the funnel. So in email campaigns, in newsletters, there's so many applicable ways to implement content, but I think at the top of the funnel is a really interesting place for brands to start.
Yeah, the person who came to mind to me, I don't know if you can relate to this or if you have seen what I've seen, the Mudwater team and Shane from the Mudwater team.
Yeah,
he does such amazing. A good job with it, right? It's just totally. Him on camera, and he is, first of all, he's literally an artist, right? Like his personal Instagram is just him like painting all day, like crazy paintings. But his video content just tells the story so well, and then they just recycle. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I think as a marketer, like you need to learn to recycle shamelessly all the time because people just overestimate or underestimate whatever one. How often you can and should repeat yourself and say the same thing. And they tell that exact same story, all the same one-liners in an email, in an Instagram post. Like play the hits is kind of like the motto. And I just love the way they do it. But
yeah, I think it really comes down. I think our generation really cares about the why behind a lot of brands. We're living in an age where it's so easy to start a brand. And it's so quick to spin something up, to white label a product, to create a website, turn on Facebook ads. So there's a lot of competition, right? And so if you're looking for a coffee alternative, there's 30 to 50 potential options that you might be hit with in your Instagram feed or at the grocery store. And so to your point, what they did brilliantly, well, first and foremost, they were one of the first coffee alternatives, and that always helps to begin a category. But they told their story in a really interesting way. And I think the aesthetic of their brand really resonated with their target audience as well. But yeah, he's a genius with storytelling, and the way that they did it was really amazing.
Maybe it's because he quit coffee and that's what activated the genius. Who knows? That's the joke.
Maybe. I'm still addicted. So, I'm still relying on my coffee, but maybe that's it.
I mean, I had coffee today too. I think you really nailed it there with our generation cares about the why behind brands. And when so many things are, I hate to say commoditized because a lot of people hear that and take it as an insult, but because everyone does certain things differently. But like even what we do, right? We write newsletters. There's plenty of people who can write newsletters. There's plenty of people who can run ads, right? You have your unique way of doing things and people, look to you for your case studies and your track record. But a lot of it is just, the likability and the human factor. Like I'm going to pick them because I can probably find someone else with a similarly good story at a similar price, but just who do I resonate with? And that's the person, emotionally I connect with because of the storytelling and because of the relationship we've built in a parasocial way through the content that I've consumed from that person.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
You mentioned this just a minute ago, digital marketing 13, 14 years. How do you envision kind of the future? How else do you see things unfolding from, the beginning of your career towards forward looking next 5 to 10?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot. And instead of thinking about what's going to change, I like to think about what's going to stay the same, because the tools and the technology is always going to change in digital marketing. If you've been in the game for more than 5 years, that's something that you're certainly privy to. I think the things that are going to stay the same are some concepts that we learn in like marketing 101. So for anyone who went to college for marketing, these concepts will be familiar to you. The first one is the 4 Ps of marketing. So the first one is price. So what's your pricing strategy? How expensive is your product in relation to all of your competitors? Are you offering discounts? Are you offering payment plans? What pricing models are you adopting? The second is the product itself. So this includes aspects like design and the features and the quality and the branding of your product. I think it's a misconception that you can create a product that's not great and spin up a beautiful website and become a 7-figure brand. I think the reality is that because there's so much competition out there today, we really need a quality product if we want to scale a business through digital marketing channels. The third one is place. So what distribution channel are you selling your product through? So are you selling through Amazon? Are you selling through a Shopify website? How's it being delivered to the customer? And then finally, promotion, which I think is what most people orient to when they think about digital marketing, which is what activities and strategies are you using to make your product known to your target audience? So that's things like Facebook and Instagram ads, email marketing, TikTok shop, organic social media. There's a whole host of potential channels there. And so what I would encourage marketers to do in 2024 and thinking about the next 5 years is return to the fundamentals. Like start your research from a place of understanding, what's your pricing strategy? How's it differentiated against your competitors? What features and benefits and core aspects of your product really make it interesting and make people want to consume it or purchase it? What distribution channels are you leveraging? Like, does it make sense to create a product and launch it on Amazon versus create a Shopify store and try to scale through Facebook and Instagram advertising? If you're selling a product for $8, it's going to be very difficult to acquire customers profitably on a Shopify store through Facebook and Instagram advertising. And then finally, promotion. So what strategies are you leveraging to get your product in front of the target audience? So I would say, I would encourage, marketers to kind of return to some of the fundamentals, knowing that the technology and the tools are always going to change.
I love that. I'm often asked a similar question, or I guess I have a similar answer. People ask me, what are some hacks or growth tips or whatever for newsletters? Or like, what do you all do differently? I'm like, I didn't start this business to, do anything differently per se. Like I think of it as we just say we're going to send an email every week and it's going to be a really good email.
Yeah.
That's it. Like that's the promise, right? It's like what we're doing is just doing it right. It's like people say it didn't work for us. And it's like, well, did you do the basics? Did you nail the basics? And the answer is no. Like we're going to come in and we're going to nail the basics. And that's our strategy. And we're just not going to deviate from that strategy.
Yeah. And I think sort of like the shadow side of what you're orienting to and like the idea around this concept around create something amazing and people will come, or just create an amazing product and you're going to have success, is that one trap that I see people fall into is that they ignore the distribution channel when they're thinking about creating their product. So what do I mean by that? Kind of back to the example that I gave. If your product costs $8, for example, and you're not selling a bundled set of those products, it's going to be almost impossible for you to distribute your product on a Shopify store if you're investing in Facebook and Instagram ads, because your customer acquisition cost, of course, depending on the product that you're advertising, is probably going to be at least $20. So in what world can you spend $20 to acquire a customer and your product cost, not your gross profit, but the top line cost of your product is $8? So I think it's a combination of both. It's a combination of creating an exceptional product that is unique in some way, And then also thinking about your distribution channel. So how are you going to get it to market? And then how are you going to do that profitably based off of how much your product or service costs?
Yeah, I had a hard learned lesson. I have a co-founder named Sean. We started some businesses together in the past. And one of the businesses we'd started when we were in college was a CPG brand that sold like a sports drink online. And anytime, just the fundamentals there, it's such a simple case study of like failed microeconomics of liquid in general. Like there's distribution in the sense of like how you're describing it from a, you know, advertising distribution, but the physical distribution of the product, which is like if you are selling something for $3 a can and that can weighs a full pound, then it's like to ship 30 pounds of materials for $30 worth of like versus like the opposite example is jewelry, right? It's like, all right, this is something that is $1,000 and weighs an ounce, and you know there's security costs and stuff, but it's just kind of a maturing a business is just thinking about like fundamentals that you can't ignore any longer. It's like, okay, I was ignoring that one, and now I realized I shouldn't. It's things you've kind of known the whole time that you just thought you could ignore.
Right, ignoring the fundamentals. Yeah, so the second e-commerce business that I started was actually during COVID. And it was the first time that I got fully involved in the operations side of the business. And I was working with a 3PL out of Southern California. And I was taking a tour of the 3PL, and we were moving through the massive, like 100,000 square foot warehouse and seeing most of the products. Most of the products can fit in the palm of your hand. And he takes me over to this one section, and there are these boxes that are like the size of cars that are just stacked on top of one another, going up like 10 stories into the warehouse. And I'm like, what the hell's in those boxes? And he said that they're these massive floaty pool toys. And the company that was selling these floaty pool toys was selling a commodity. You could essentially buy the same pool toy anywhere online. But the advantage that this business had is that the dad of the founder of this business owned the import company that was importing these toys from China. And so they were able to import these toys for like 50% less than everyone else. And so it basically just gave them, it gave them a competitive advantage on their margin. So they could spend the same amount of customer acquisition cost on Amazon within their advertising and on Meta, but they had 50% more margin on their cost of goods sold. So to your point, I think that's fundamental for business owners, especially in the D2C space, is to really think about understanding the entirety of the P&L. So like marketers who only understand the top half of the P&L and like how to sell a product profitably are not going to be as effective as those, to your point, that understand the operations side of the business, that can understand, you know, how cost of goods sold impacts profitability. So I think that that's really crucial for anyone who's thinking about starting a direct to consumer business. Yeah, sure. Like go understand all the marketing fundamentals and then either partner with someone or really get your operations fundamentals in line as well.
Yeah, having someone shout at you that you're about to make a massive mistake is always a helpful addition to the team. We kind of glossed over some of the pretty, you know, brand name experiences that you've had kind of over the course of your career, both at the present agency and some of the places you've been in the past. What are some of the things that you've taken from that time advising the marketing strategy for major brands, and, you know, how's that influencing strategy kind of present day at Courageous?
So, yeah, as you mentioned, I've worked with some really large brands, some of them in the tech space, some of them a little bit heavier in the retail space. You know, it's interesting. I think when you work with a large brand, take a brand like Adidas or Capital One or Netflix or Upwork, the way that an agency partner might interact with those brands is very siloed. So for example, if we're doing SEO for Netflix, there is a procurement team that delegates, let's call it $300,000 a year just for that SEO contract with the agency. And then there's an internal SEO point of contact that we're working with. And we're kind of staying within that silo. So we're kind of just operating within that very specific silo. We don't have a lot of visibility into what else is happening in other channels. We're not interacting with other points of contact who are working on advertising or creating content for a newsletter. So it's quite a siloed experience. On the flip side, at Courageous, we're working directly with a lot of founders and folks at like the VP level. And so the conversations that are happening are quite different in that we need to understand, kind of to our conversation earlier, not only like how are we impacting channel specific KPIs, like if we're doing an SEO campaign for Netflix, our channel specific KPI might be driving more traffic or increasing keyword rankings. But how do those channel specific KPIs impact the business? So how are we driving revenue through all these channel specific activities that we're doing? And so I think working with some of the large brands gave me and some of the team members at Courageous experience understanding how to orient strategies and tactics to a specific objective. But working with a lot of these founders at Courageous, we really need to take it one step beyond. So it's less about like, how do we impact the channel specific metrics, and how do these activities that we're doing within all these individual channels map back to net profitability at the business, because we're speaking directly to founders. So I would say what we're doing at Courageous feels a lot more entrepreneurial. It feels like we're kind of in the co-pilot seat with the founders. Whereas when I was working and some of my colleagues were working with this larger brands, it kind of felt like we were in the back of the bus a little bit. It's like we were operating within our own little channel, but we didn't really have a lot of visibility into how everything else kind of worked in conjunction together.
When you're first starting out as a marketer, what are some of the, I guess, misconceptions or things that you thought were true at the time that you've kind of since learned, were not the case, or some kind of additional mistakes that you made that now you're just like, wow, that was not the way to do things?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is quite a tactical answer, but
I like tactical.
yeah, I would say, when anyone that's in the CPG world, that's indirect consumer marketing, probably has some experience with Facebook and Instagram ads. So Facebook and Instagram ads are a channel that post iOS 14 was a lot easier. So we could kind of like create a relatively simple campaign structure. The targeting felt a lot more sophisticated and accurate. And we could launch campaigns. Our landing pages didn't need to be great, and we could drive a lot of conversions in a very scalable way. And I think post iOS 14, some of my assumptions as a marketer 5-10 years ago was I could turn on a Facebook ad campaign and it would just automatically print money for my business. And I think as I've grown in my marketing career, and as as we've all as a marketing community had to understand how to leverage this channel in a post iOS 14 world, I think that there's a lot more that we need to do in order to grow from this channel specifically. And I'm speaking to this channel specifically because it's one that offers tremendous scale for a lot of CPG brands. So it's one that a lot of CPG brand owners either have experience with or have tried in the past. And so things that we probably need to do better today than what we used to do in the past is rapidly improve how effective our creative is. So the days of creating like a mediocre piece of content and letting that drive profitability within meta ad accounts are kind of over. The creative strategy is really what drives effectiveness on meta ad campaigns in 2024. Going back to the product and really understanding like, what do people love about this product or service? How can we communicate that in a really effective way that people are going to resonate with in our creative? Featuring bestsellers in our ads. So really focusing on the products that people love within our ads, and then getting the other products that are less popular in front of people in campaigns like through our email channels, for example. Working on our financials to lower our ROAS targets. So understanding that customer acquisition costs are increasing, finding ways to be able to spend a little bit more on acquiring our first customer so that we can increase our lifetime value and average order value and find profitability after that initial purchase. Testing different pricing strategies and offer structures, and then building awareness outside of Meta. So not just relying on a channel like Meta as our only channel, but figuring out other ways that we can get our product or service in front of people outside of that channel so that when they do see our ad, it can help improve our customer acquisition cost. So just to kind of circle it back to your question, I think marketers who cut their teeth like 5-10 years ago, actually probably closer to 5 years ago, were kind of living in this world in the CPG space where Facebook and Instagram was kind of this golden goose machine. And I think post the iOS update, it's really forced us to become better marketers because it's forced us to really think more holistically about the 4 Ps that I talked about earlier, about who really cares about this product or service, telling our stories really effectively, creating really meaningful on-page experiences when people come from the ad to our landing page. So yeah, it's not really just about that channel anymore. I think it's forced us to become a lot better and more sophisticated marketers.
And I think you delivered some tactical lessons learned. So thank you for that. Last question here, and it's one I've asked, I think every guest since I've rebranded the podcast as the Orbit Marketing Podcast has been, and maybe I'll tailor it a little bit to your recent question. The question is usually, what's the most impactful piece of content you've ever created? I'll broaden the scope to like just the most, whether it's been for you or for a client, and if it's organic content or creative, but just the best performing, most impactful piece of content. It could be just by real quantitative metrics, just like, we made this ad, everyone, 90% of people watched it to the end and it drove a gajillion dollars in sales. Or it's like this just sparked a lot of conversation and led to like earned media and things like that. So it's really take it however you'd like, but something that comes to mind.
Yeah, I'll talk about a Facebook and Instagram ad that I ran during COVID. During the time, I actually sold Zoom backgrounds. This was before the virtual background thing was a thing.
Yeah.
And this was kind of my COVID like $1 million idea that turned into a big thing during COVID. And I ran one Facebook ad, which generated 7 figures in revenue. And this was this was pre iOS 14 update. So the game was a little bit different back then.
Yep.
But we shot the entire ad at my house in San Diego. My roommates, Jordo and Maddie, were in the ad. And the ad was basically like your standard problem, solution, feature, benefit, call to action Facebook ad. It showed the assembly of the product. It showed Maddie sitting in front of her camera and snapping her fingers and the Zoom background changing behind her. This was before the virtual backgrounds were really crisp and clean. They were a little bit glitchy back then.
Yeah.
So this product really made it like really crisp and clean. And I think what was successful about it is that it is a little bit trite to create an ad that follows that framework. Here's your problem. Here's your solution. Feature, benefit, feature, benefit, feature, benefit, call to action. However, I think if you demonstrate how your product works and why people should care, and if you can really nail the core benefit that people are struggling with, and you can do that in a visually interesting way, it's a trite framework for creating an ad, but it still works. And I just want to name like a tactic that we're doing right now that's been really fantastic for us. And if you're in the Facebook and Instagram ad world, you've probably heard about this. But one of the things that we're doing is we're mining Reddit, Amazon, and Shopify reviews and feeding them into ChatGPT and basically having ChatGPT find us what the most interesting or most cited pain points are from the customers who have reviewed the product. And I find that that's a lot more effective than asking a founder or someone on a marketing team what the most important pain points or features and benefits are, because you're hearing from hundreds or thousands of people all at one time. So Yeah, that was the most effective piece of content that we ran. It's been a couple years since I've watched the ad, but I still have it on my phone. And we just ran that one ad, and it delivered 7 figures for that business.
That's incredible. I think you really delivered on, again, a lot of it's a fitting way to end the conversation with the ad that was so impactful, being so by the book and textbook. It's just like we do the things, we show up, we keep trying, and it's like inventing the wheel with effort, but not reinventing the wheel with like unique strategy. Just like doing proven things over and over again. I love the idea. We don't really do much paid at this stage for what a lot of what we do, but that same framework for coming up with any content idea, right? Because a lot of times the best ideas aren't inside of your head. And so you hear what people are saying about you. Like I always tell people, what questions are you literally getting asked? Like that is the content to make. What are people saying about your product? Like you don't have to make things up. Just it's out
Right.
there. So I think that's a great tip for content creation broadly, is to like look at reviews, whether you have them or not for your product. Like maybe your competitor has reviews, maybe your competitor has testimonials, and the same journey and benefits you want people to experience are stories you can tell. You can't take credit for that specific person's story, but it does give you message. The most effective messaging is real messaging that has come from real people in that situation. So
Yeah, and I think if you're relatively new to marketing, or if you're a founder and this is like your first foray into digital marketing, it can feel really, really overwhelming. There's so many channels, there's so many new things happening. There's so many people on Twitter posting about some growth hack that made them $1 million. And I think it's really important, like you said, to just focus on some of those fundamentals and focus on those tried and true tactics that are really working for brands. There's a book that I love called Principles by Ray Dalio. And one of the quotes that I love from that book is he says that new is always overvalued in relation to old and good. And so people always over index on like, this is the new sexy thing that's working versus the old tried and true good thing that's kind of known to work across the board. And so I think there's this temptation for people to kind of chase the new sexy tactic or growth hack or channel. And some of that stuff works. I'm not discounting that at all. But I do think that really learning the fundamentals of marketing and really learning what's worked historically for brands, reading some of the old school ad copywriting books,
Yep.
studying Ogilvy and like some of the old school marketing tactics, those things are still working today. They're just happening in a slightly different format. And so I would encourage anyone who's new to marketing to really start with some of those fundamentals.
Yeah. Now, I think we're coming into time here, and I've known you speak or heard that you speak well in other places about kind of the intersection of just entrepreneurship and personal life. But one thing I always kind of think about is, the point of your business in your career oftentimes, it can be a source of fulfillment, and it should be in some ways. But in terms of like, we're doing it for results most of the time. And not to say like, purposely choose the most boring strategy, but don't see your business as your outlet for like novelty and like sexy entertainment. It's like use the thing, like your business is like, okay, what works in this situation? I'm going to go do that. And then like, go watch a movie or scroll YouTube or go on TikTok or make a YouTube, like test your stuff in the low stakes environment where you just do wwhatever feels fun. And then in your business, like stick to the thing that works. That's kind of my attitude these days. It's like,
yeah,
you can have that outlet. Just like, you don't need to make like the thing that you depend on for your income the place where you try a bunch of wacky stuff. It's like,
totally.
Do the stuff that works, then go crazy on the side or something. It's like, I'm from Vegas, right? So like make a sports betting account with like $100 in it and put in like your most wild, crazy, unresearched bets. And then like in your actual portfolio, just like do the boring stuff. It's kind of the same attitude. But
yeah, like buy the S&P index fund and don't necessarily go try to find all the next NVIDIAs.
It's like put 95% into that. Exactly.
Yeah,
and then put the do whatever the hell, like go crazy, like just the most degenerate strategies with this side account. Because like half the fun is just a lot of the fun's making the meaningful money from it, but half the time it's just being able to scratch the itch in a degenerate way. So
totally.
Yeah. Where should people go to learn more about yourself, Courageous, all that good stuff?
Yeah, I'd love to chat with anyone who's interested. You can email me, Jordan@courageoushq.com. And you can find me on most platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc., at Jordan Frank.
Awesome. Well, Jordan, it's been a blast. Thanks so much for sharing your time.